Okay, the tests aren't graded yet, they're close, okay? I don't know if I'll have them back on Wednesday to be able to give them back to you. I'm hoping by Wednesday I'll be able to input the grades. Fair? I just don't know if I'll be prepared in time to come back to class and actually give them to you, okay? That's the goal. Fingers crossed. I'm sure there'll be a whole 10 people here on Wednesday. The paper will do that, so I can imagine that,
The drop rate goes up?
huh? What's that?
The drop rate goes up?
Yeah, no one ever shows up that day. The papers do at 1, which is kind of the class rates. So technically it should be coming to class, but there are always people that don't. So, not that that makes any difference, just like an election. Whoever does it, any questions about the paper before we move on?
Will they be marked before the 19th?
Will be marked before your exam. Yeah. You might not get it before. The drop is on the 19th.
Yeah, well, it's last day to spend it.
Okay. The drop date next week. You're probably not gonna have that one. Okay, any questions about that at all? You get a lot of questions about the paper, like asking me if I should talk about this or talk about that. I can't answer those questions. You need to decide what you're going to talk about. I'm a bit hesitant. I have no problem saying yes, you're on the right track. You know, you're not on the right track. Think about these other things. That's all right. But asking me if you should specifically speak about something, well, that depends on whatever argument you're making. It'd be unrealistic or it'd be unfair for me to say no to anything that you want to talk about because it might ultimately fit. Does that make sense? Yeah. Just be mindful of the email that you sent in terms of how it's phrased, because obviously I'm not going to tell you right about this, and this. This is part of the, obviously part of the assignment is to form that argument. Okay? I still feel really crappy. My voice will, but I just got it back. This is my voice I got, like I had no voice on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, like at all. Like I sounded, like I was like, I sounded like I was going through puberty again. So, my voice may kick out at any point. I'm not going to be obviously running around in the class screaming and yelling. I'll be pretty soft. So if you can't hear, just let me know and I'll try to protect my voice a little bit more, okay? That's a practice. All right. Today we're going to be talking about the extractive industries. What are extractive industries? Say extractive industries. What are we referring to? Yeah.
Oil, gases, and stuff like that.
Sorry?
Oil, ground, gases.
So things from the ground. They don't necessarily need to be actually from ground. But yes, I mean, the things that we extract basically from the earth, generally we're talking about the primary industries, raw materials, okay? Everything that we use to stay warm, to communicate, to sleep, to cook, yeah? Generally comes from these raw materials. They're embedded in our daily lives and an important part of an important part of our existence. Okay, we rely on them a fair bit. It's important to understand that what we rely on will ultimately change with changes in technology, our consumption practices, or what we consume and how we consume are not necessarily, they're actually quite dynamic and not static. because of the change, our reliance on certain types of raw materials are more profound. Some of them are more long-term, we're there's a greater dependency on certain types of products for a variety of reasons, some of them being social, some of them being economic, and so on and so forth. And some of them were not as, and so we sort of look at some of these in terms of their importance. One thing I want to keep in mind for this is that for a lot of raw materials, we do only focus on the extractive side, mainly two. The two that this textbook focuses on. I don't even go into the second one that much. I really just stick to the first one, which is oil. The two that we're going to talk about, one to a lesser degree, is also copper. So it's oil and copper, and that's sort of the textbook focus. So the two that I'm going to look at, obviously we're spending more time on oil than we are on copper. Although copper is extremely important as well. Yeah. When we talk about, if I say the word resource, what am I referring to? Resource. The name is not actually linked to a raw material. Yeah.
Something that has worth.
Yeah, something with value, right? Something that has value. There's obviously a socio-cultural and political construction to resources, right? In terms of how we define that value, where that value sort of is embedded. Things, obviously, if they at any one point are no longer considered to have value, are they still resources? For example, oil, we woke up one day and we were no longer dependent on oil, and oil's value was worth nothing. Is that still a resource that we're going to be extracting from the earth? Obviously not. Okay? Where have we seen this in terms of some resources that go through this process that we call unbecoming? Where do we see this actually happen? Where have we seen this happen? We think of a resource or something that we've extracted that used to be a resource, which is no longer a resource. We still use coal. There's a perfect example of a political, socio, and a cultural construction of what a resource is. China burns lots of coal. We have moved away from coal. Yeah, we've attempted to move away from coal. We still use coal. Frankly, coal is no longer used in a lot of places that it was formerly. It used to be used in the plant, like it was used inside the actual production process, and in transportation, and it just we don't rely on it as a more fossil. It's not something that we rely on as much anymore. We've moved away from it. And we moved away from it for a variety of reasons. Do you know why? What do you think some reason why we moved away from coal? What are some issues with coal? Yeah.
It's not sustainable, it's bad for, it pollutes the air, there's not
acid
enough
rain.
resources.
Yeah. So there's a lot of it. It's actually one of the natural resources where the value of the amount is actually, that we know, one of the fossil fuels that we know there's an abundance of, which makes it cheap, right? So it is cheap, but there's a lot of negative, one being pollution, right? Involving acid rain, it's just a lot dirtier, right? So it's been replaced by a lot of things for those reasons and obviously more. But anyway, it's not the case in all places. China, as I mentioned, is the number one buyer or user of coal in the world. So depending on where you are in the development cycle, right? If you're a developed country or developing, it's obviously going to sort of somewhat dictate, what fossil fuels you might want to leverage. People have argued that the burden of fossil fuels, because it's cheap, has helped places like the United States, the UK, parts of Europe, other parts of Europe, industrialize much quicker. Yeah, and so that's part of the argument that the Chinese make, that there's a lot of rules and regulations on emissions, and Chinese ultimately feel like, or they argue or have argued, that it's much more difficult for them to industrialize in other areas. products that may cost more. Anything else? Any other resources that have gone through this process of becoming that you can think of? Anyone?
It's like the resource curse thing.
No, a resource curse is something different. We'll talk about the resource curse. What resource that we rely on formally that we no longer rely on? Come on. Yeah.
Whale oil?
Whale oil? Is it still used in some places? Nowhere? Yeah. You think of this more widely used one that if your home was built, let's say post or pre 1975, yeah, your entire house would probably be covered in this stuff, including maybe some of your buildings on your campus.
Asbestos?
Asbestos, yeah,
This is a resource?
yeah, comes from the ground, it's mine. There's a huge deposit of asbestos not in, is in certain, but in Canada. So if you think about a place like Canada, we ship a lot of asbestos to other places. So I mean, China uses asbestos. So the problem with asbestos is not asbestos itself, is when asbestos is moved. The particular matter that can get into your lungs and cause a variety of respiratory issues. We used to actually put this in about everything we use as insulin. Yeah? We've moved away from this because of, we understand these prolonged negative effects of it. They moved away from it in construction because anytime that you had to move this stuff, it was basically additional cost. Yeah? So it's still used in some places in the world. In Canada, we've basically, we're at the point where we don't use this anymore. In China, they still use it. It makes a difference, some of maybe if you think about things like, you know, it's unsafe in one place, why can't it be safe in another? Yeah? I mean, it's pretty, you know, it's pretty well known, right? People are completely aware of some of are aware of the negative effects of these types of things, right? These resources and what they cause. We have, you know, as a government in Canada, said, you know what, we're going to not use this anymore. And the other places are like, oh yeah, just send it over, it's cheap. We'll put it in everything as well. I mean, it was like a mystery. It was like a miracle product, right? Like especially we put everything from like brake pads. I think I told you this in the other class, but I know that there's a brake company called Asbestos. Anyone ever heard of them? They make brakes for cars. They had asbestos in the brake pads. It was put in everything. Yeah, like I mean, like legitimately everything. You know, I work in a building that was built, or across from the building that was built a long, long time ago, and they did some renovations on the building, and literally had to like quarantine the entire building off because there's asbestos in everything. Yeah. In my house, I bought popcorn ceilings. Yeah. In the popcorn ceiling, they put asbestos, and so I didn't know if there was asbestos used in the popcorn ceilings. And I got like, you know, kids and stuff like that, and I was scraping the ceilings, and I just started to spray the stuff and started to scrape it. Start scraping it, and then it's falling. I'm like, hold on a second. Is there a possibility there's asbestos in this? Because they literally put it in everything. Yeah? There's like aged red hot sauce. Yeah? I feel? All right. So anyway, they go through this process of becoming things that are a resource today are not necessarily going to be a resource tomorrow. Okay? And so that's an important thing to remember. Because especially places that are reliant on certain natural resources, which is the idea of the resource curse, if you're reliant on one major resource, yeah, if you're rich in natural resources and maybe, you know, the exporting of one of those things is literally takes up the lion's share of your economic economic sort of profile as a nation, what happens when that is no longer viable? What happens when nobody wants to buy that? Quite volatile. Not all things, but most things. Anyway, we have obviously resources which are renewable and resources which are non-renewable. Fundamental difference between the two obviously is one can replenish and the other one is that there's a finite amount that actually exists. And once you extract that, once you use that, you basically deplete that entire resource. Okay, so some examples, obviously oil. We don't, oil is not renewable. We can have more oil which is being created. We can find more oil. Yeah. We don't know how much actually exists currently. With technological changes, the values of those might increase, but there is a finite amount. Yeah, and we're constantly trying to project what that amount actually is because of how reliant we are on oil. Some renewable, and obviously fisheries, unless you mess that up. Agriculture is largely a renewable resource. As long as don't mess that up as well. We can screw things up pretty badly to the point that we can make renewable resources non-renewable. Okay, so it's important to understand that because something is renewable, you still need to manage that resource properly to basically sustain that. I was in a hockey tournament in Montreal in April, and there was a team there from St. John's, and or St. John's, sorry, not St. John's, from St. John, New Brunswick, and like talking to them, they were basically like they were very like blue collar kind of guys, and they were pretty interesting dudes to talk to. So we went out one night, we're sitting there and we're talking about cod. And basically cod come back to the region. So there's a little bit of a small fishery, but there's some cod that's there again. There's stories about cod literally jumping into people's boats. That's how much cod was there. But without regulation, right, without proper controls, you can deplete those things to the point that you can ruin, an entire employment sector, if it's not managed properly. So there's huge implications to these things. Okay. So we'll talk about extractive industry. We'll talk about things that we use for our day-to-day. We're going to look at oil, as I mentioned, as well as some ferrous and non-ferrous materials like iron ore and copper. Ferrous materials are basically materials that have iron in them. Iron ore and coal are extremely important in southern Ontario. You guys know how steel's made? You guys know how steel's made? Iron ore and coal. Not just coal, it's actually coke. It's basically coal with high carbon, and it's basically smelted. You smelt iron ore with these like smelting things, and it gets really, really hot, and you add coke to it, that basically creates steel. So, a lot of industry basically through the manufacturing belt, which includes part of the Maritimes, southern Ontario, Quebec, southern Ontario, and basically through the eastern part of the United States and the west. Right? Basically, it touches, like St. Louis, Missouri, that part. Heavily, industries, a lot of steel, a lot of things that were, heavy industries, things that rely on steel and coal. Okay. So here again, here's a look at the extractive industry. We can basically break these things up into three categories, as I mentioned, or part of what I mentioned. Energy minerals, things like coal, gas, oil, and uranium, right? So things that are used for energy purposes. Coal, people use hydrogen coal, it's used for transportation, a variety of energy sources. Gas, natural gas specifically. Every province in Canada has a natural gas, except for Manitoba, I believe, even the territories have natural gas deposits. And so Canada is fairly known for the natural gas, easy to transport through pipelines, right? Fairly easy to transport. Obviously, it's heavily used in these areas. Oil, a variety of types of oils. Each one will have different refining time or way of refining it. And uranium, which is used obviously for nuclear energy. Then we have metallic minerals, so ferrous, things that have iron in them, and then basically non-ferrous materials, as well as non-metallic. Metallic materials are things like construction stuff, so you've got natural stone in your home, rock, things like that, gravel, limestone, whatever, right? Those types of things. As well as industrial minerals and precious stones like diamonds and gems. Diamonds. You guys know why people buy diamonds for their spouse? You know, that diamond ring when you propose. Do you know where this comes from?
It comes from the diamond company.
I mean, now it's actually, traditionally, it actually made a lot of sense. Diamonds were rare, which we're not really sure if they're that rare. Right? Price is driven by quantity. Yeah, how much is actually there. So the cost of diamonds will go up and down based on supply of diamonds. Diamonds are not a renewable resource. It's like there's a finite amount. Once you mine it, it's gone. Each diamond is generally unique, right? It has a unique profile. So there's a lot of things, sort of connotations to love, yeah, that come out of that. And the cost is quite high. So there was this tradition that you would have to buy at least 3 to 6 months of your income would have to be spent on this engagement ring that you would give to your spouse or future spouse. You're going to be able to get it for a female. The reason for that was that way back in the day, there was no life insurance. And so the actual, so I never really knew this until I had to go buy an engagement ring. I'm like, why the hell do I do this? Let me find out. And so I'm not even joking. So I started doing some research. I'm like, if I gotta do this, I don't know why I'm doing this. I didn't get it. I'm engagement gift. I'm sure I did. So I get this thing anyway. So I started doing some research anyway. So where it comes from is actually, there's no life insurance. And so you get 3 to 6 months into this ring, and that would act as life insurance in case the man, who was generally the primary breadwinner at that time, passed away. The woman could pawn off the ring, and she could live for 3 to 6 months off the value of that ring, and be okay. Which is not uncommon. Males die much more frequently than women do in our middle ages, right? We obviously more males are actually conceived and born than females, but we're more biologically vulnerable, and so a lot of us die when we're very young. Into our 20s, we do a lot of really stupid things. If you don't believe, look at your car insurance rates. By the time that we get into our mid-20s, we start to get neck and neck, and then basically from that point forward, women basically, especially this in developed worlds like Canada, the United States, women basically take off. And we get kind of left behind. And so, we got, yeah? And so anyway, it was, that was a large reason why people went out and bought these engagements. So there's a really fun fact for the thing. Obviously, do we still need these things? No, we don't. Why? Because we have life insurance. You can actually go and get life insurance. To actually protect yourself from these types of things. But that's where the tradition sort of comes from. And obviously, we keep up with that because of the traditional side. Anyway, so diamonds are actually quite important. There's a little clip I was going to show you on diamonds, but we'll see if we get time. Okay. Copper is the most important metallic mineral. Okay, makes up about 1/5 of the world metallic mineral production. It's used in a lot of different, different types of things. So, especially in building, and so again, it has a variety of end uses. Heavily important. There's a huge industry actually around recycling copper. A whole industry around that. There's actually places like Germany and Japan that are poor in natural resources and copper resources, but they're able to basically be large producers, largely because they are refining or recycling used copper for a variety of different end uses. So, which is pretty interesting. We'll look at that in a little bit. This is oil. Multiple end uses for oil. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that oil is used in all kinds of things, from your cooking ware to your television, to your toothbrush, to your cosmetics, and so on and so forth. I think most people kind of just, when we think about oil, we think about automobiles, so we think about transportation. Is that a fair statement? Most of us think about transportation. The reality is that our dependence on oil goes much beyond that. The reality is it's put into a lot of products, but even beyond being put into products, the transportation side to get these products to you are heavily reliant on those industries. And this is why there's a big deal when prices fell, so there's overproduction based on OPEC countries, right? They produced, and so what happens, they flooded the market, and what happened was the cost of oil dropped. It dropped substantially. And in places like Canada where the extraction is extremely expensive, you need oil to be at a very high price for it to be economically viable to extract from those areas. Make sense? Now, so the price dropped and consumers got kind of happy because they figured, okay, well, the price is lower, we're going to experience some of those benefits. And the cost of gas at the pumps had decreased a fair bit, about 20 cents or so a liter. But where they didn't was in airfares. And people were complaining, right? So like, well, hold on a second. An air like Air Canada they're saving money now. Yeah, so 20 cents on a liter, right? The fuel leaks, probably not 20 cents, whatever it is, you know what I mean? But there's a cost savings here. I mean, the price of oil basically got slashed in half. Yeah, more than half. It was like 60% was a drop. So why not? Right? Why aren't the consumers seeing that? So there's a huge issue with that. The cost of goods should have decreased slightly as a result of that. And we didn't actually see these things. But anyway, we're heavily reliant on this stuff. It's embedded in all kinds of stuff, right? That we use on a daily basis. Okay. The actual production network for oil is actually quite simple. It's a simple chain, like in all business applications. Everything has to be simple. These networks are generally simple. But it actually deals with the, majorly complex relationships between states, the transnational corporations, and the transnational corporations will sort of manage these. Sometimes the people that deal with a lot of the extractive industry kind of side of things are actually state-owned, state firms that will actually control this stuff. And we'll look at some of those examples in a bit. But anyway, what you have is your gold production network, same thing, right? You have the exploration. We look at this in terms of a papaya. Maybe it's slightly different. The biggest thing is this stuff over here. Yeah. The exploration, which is extremely expensive. This is done basically to find resources. It's not just one thing to find the resources, but there have to be enough resources there where it becomes economically viable to develop those sites. Yeah. If there's not enough, it is not economically viable to develop those sites. You're not going to stay there. You're not going to extract from 1 barrel of oil. Yeah, you're not, you know what I mean? There has to be enough for a while. There must be some longevity to it because the cost of exploration and the cost of development, and the cost of extraction, and the cost of processing, for that matter, is extremely capital intensive. Yeah, we're not dealing with papaya. Yeah, this is not the papaya. This is vastly different in terms of the cost, the amount of overhead that's required to do these things. Okay. Obviously, this goes straight through to the consumption side. Obviously, transportation plays a major role in this as well. Okay, so here we're just going to take a look at some of the complexity in terms of the production chain. One thing I want you to sort of know is the role that the state plays in these. So you might play some, this might get some juices flowing for you for your papers if you chose this topic. So you got exploration, right? Exploration production will generally happen in one state. That state will basically, those countries, those places will issue basically exploration licenses that will basically give people the right to go into those places to find those resources, to find those sources. The state will obviously put forward taxation, right? No tax. They may choose to tax high, low, or not at all. Health and safety regulations as well as environmental regulations. And these will differ from place to place. So that might happen in one place, right? So exploration and production. Once you produce and you can actually extract that raw material from the ground, in this case we'll look at crude oil, right? So if you take crude out, it is then transported to another place where it is actually refined. I think Canada should refine our oil. What happens in tar sands? Where do we send our oil? Where in the U.S.? Yeah, Texas. Yeah. New Orleans, there's a refinery that that happens there. We send it to the States. Why do we do that? Why don't we send it to the US?
It's cheaper for them to find it than to do it here.
Why?
We already had like established.
Should we establish refining in Canada? Who thinks we should? Who thinks we shouldn't? Who's not sure? Should we refine here? Should we develop that? Yeah.
I think there's gonna be a lot of pollution as a byproduct if we do that.
Do we care? I mean that in a, I, but places care. The tar sand is one of the dirtiest, yeah, I mean, the most environmentally unfriendly oil, production, extraction facilities in the world. Yeah, it is like the dirtiest. Like the environmental impact that come out of the tar sands, they're like, it's not the worst, they're one of the, they're one of the worst, if not the worst. Thoughts? Should we?
Infrastructure report is expensive.
Nobody?
I feel like there's a lot of factors to consider. Also, like regulation, probably the US can like propose it, like maybe it doesn't allow it because of NAFTA.
Yeah. I mean, the refining part, I mean, there's obviously agreements in place. They buy our oil, number one buyer of our oil. Proximity is a huge deal for transporting bitumen from the tar sands there. So there's heavily related to the markets that we have. When people are specialized in something, the cost to actually produce those things starts to go down. It becomes very difficult for any other place, for other markets that don't have developed industries around those to get in. Yeah, it's very hard for them to enter those things because there's no competitive advantage of that. Yeah, and so literally from a competition standpoint, you would actually be losing money to actually do that. And so it's hard. Could you develop to the point that you gain some of those advantages? Sure, but who's going to be selling oil to you for refining? Okay, how much are you producing? Yeah. You gotta think about the market size. There's a huge market difference in terms of, between Canada and that of the United States. Like population in Canada fits in, it basically fits inside of California. And so you gotta think about the amount of consumption, the value of consumption that happens in that market versus ours. Yeah, fundamentally different. And that does things in terms of cost. Yeah. Anyway, so not just one state, but multiple states that actually deal with that. As it goes through this process, yeah, the role of states will obviously differ from place to place. By the time we get to the refining process, things will be refined for a variety of end uses, right? So things will be refined for obviously fuels and lubricants, which generally are a sort of place that we automatically think of in terms of oil, right? Largely in terms of where we use it and what we use it for, in terms of how we equate that natural resource, ultimately consumption, or to feedstock. We talk about feedstock, we're talking about basically raw materials that are used to supply fuel for machines or industrial process, but ultimately not for a fuel or lubricant. Does that make sense? So if I think like plastics that might be used in some sort of production process or something like that. So that's what we mean by feedstock. So again, you got, just we take oil in Canada as an example, you got Canada, you got exploration and production happening in Canada, you got the extraction of the raw material, you got the United States, and then you got the back, right? Where you get the stuff that's basically refined, and where the consumption is actually happening in Canada in the end. Yeah, makes sense? Here we're looking at oil production, 1,000 barrels per day. Growth of about 46% from 1975 to 2007, so you can see some of that reliance, increased reliance. There are about 12 countries that account for about 68% of the world total. The top two being Russia and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is number one, basically. Actually, Saudi Arabia, I think, accounts for about 25% of the total in terms of oil. Saudi Arabia. That's why there was a bit when Donald Trump came out and put a travel ban on all these countries, and he just forgot about Saudi Arabia. People were honestly quite critical of that. A big part of the reason why, you got to think about some of that relationship that's there and the importance and how strategic that country is from an oil perspective. Middle East as a whole basically accounts for 31% of the world oil production. Okay, there are definitely new producers coming on the scene, but if you think about the majority of oil is that which we're right about here. Yeah, and if you think about what where these countries actually are, one of the things that you'll realize is that this is a very unstable region in the world. A lot of wars that have actually taken place there, very unstable, a great degree of instability. In large part, maybe part of that resource, the importance of that resource. Okay. Again, we have new producers, so this map is becoming a lot more complex than it was in the past. So there's obviously some diversity in terms of where the supply is coming from. We call this sort of new oil. China is a huge producer now. In large part, they are a large producer, not because they're rich in the natural resource, but more so because they've been sourcing and producing in China, in Africa. So they signed agreements with a lot of African nations where they've gone in there and basically bought out oil supplies from the markets. And of course they need it, in fact, we're industrializing, and we have a very large population. Okay. Mexico, China, Nigeria. Norway is a huge oil producing country in Europe, actually one of the cleanest. They've never really had a major spill or any issue. And theirs comes from the sea. The sea is just basically it's sea oil. Okay. Here we're looking at the patterns of world trade. So we're looking at exports and imports. Okay, in terms of who's importing, who's exporting. So the U.S. has a large importer. Over 50% of exports actually go to the U.S. And the European Union. Okay, so that's where the majority is actually going. Over 20% of exports go to China and Japan. Okay. Again, China is one of the largest importers of oil in the world. Again, they've been sourcing a lot of it from Africa, as I mentioned. Here we're looking at some global trends or trade in oil. And what you basically notice here is that it's quite lopsided in terms of where it's going. Relatively few nations, again, count for more exports of energy, while others depend on that, on those other places for energy. Right, so again, a very uneven geography. You get the sense of maybe some of that instability that comes with oil when you look at a country like the United States, which is not a major exporter of oil, but a major importer, one of the largest consumers of oil, and you think about who's basically providing those products to them. Yeah. Canada, as I mentioned, imports, we have a huge obviously in tar sands, okay, in Alberta, in the Athabasca region. We do import a little bit from the North Sea, but just very little in relation to what we produce. Okay. Here we're looking at, again, oil as a share of a country's merchandise exports. In some places, it's the dominant commodity which is traded, right? It's the number one. It makes up almost 100% of their merchandise exports. That, to me, equates to instability. Oil is extremely volatile in price as a commodity. And so as a result, you've got some countries that are completely for land on those things. That's the number one form of, the number one resource which is exported. That poses some problems, doesn't it? Yeah, or you can foresee how some of those issues might arise. So take a look at some of these countries where, you know, not only if oil's your thing, its chances are it's your only thing. What I'm trying to get at here, right? So yeah, Iraq, Angola, Algeria, Libya, Kuwait, Nigeria. Yeah, get the idea? Yeah, what do some of these countries have in common? What do they have in common? Yeah.
There's war there.
And stability, right? A lot of instability. So one thing that they have in common, as I mentioned again, if they're exporting oil, chances are it's their most important commodity. Okay? Okay. Here we're looking at copper. So the geography of copper production is a little bit different than that of oil. It's a bit more profound in the sense that it happens, it's not as dominated in one place. Again, about 84% basically between, production has increased about 84% between 1980 and 2011. This is 2007. Between 1988 and 2007, about 75%, and then it jumped up from 2007 to 2011 by about 9% from that point. The real reason is the fact that copper is extremely flexible. It can be used in a lot of different, and has a lot of different end uses. And so it can be obviously a sought after commodity for that reason. There are 10 countries that produce over 80% of copper ore. Latin America is the dominant region, and over 50% that comes from there. Okay. I think I already talked about this, but should be asking a question here. How do you explain Germany and Japan? Well, a large part of the UK production, as I mentioned, is from refined copper, right? So the fact that they're recycling copper. Okay, so about 20% of copper scrap is actually production. So it's, you know, it's a huge industry. There's a time here. I hope I shared this with you guys. I swear to God, man, my kids get colds and they're like 110% functional. It's like they got nothing drug animals. They're maniacs. I get a cold and I feel like I literally, it's the worst thing ever. Yeah, so there's a time in Canada actually where the cost of the ice production had basically dropped. And the cost of copper had increased, and the retail side of things didn't rectify. So the whole 24 hours, I don't know if you remember this, it was like in the early 2000s or something like that, where actually if you went to a store and bought copper, you could bring it to a scrapyard and sell the copper for a higher price than what you paid for. Do you guys remember this? Somebody remember this? It was short-lived until basically the market had rectified itself. But it happened, it was like 24 hours. Where if you went to like Home Depot and you bought like wheels of like wire and you split it and you took out the copper piece, you would have got more money at the scrapyard for that the scrap copper than you would have had for paying for the whole roll of wire of copper, whatever it was. Yeah. Huge industry around this. There's actually fears of thefts. In new subdivisions when houses are being built, they will actually employ security guards because the cost of copper is quite expensive and people pay a premium for these things. My neighbor used to do this all the time, and I never knew what the hell he was doing. He was a guy who was sitting in his little stool, he wore these ugly flip-flops, and so this little stool in the garage, and I used to see him all the time, and I talked to him like, on occasion. And I would see him like, and every night he'd sit there on this little stool. I've done like, it's like a one step for like little kids to like wash his hands on at a sink, you know? And he's sitting on this thing, and he's splitting this white wire and taking this copper, and I see the little pliers just cutting the wire. What the hell is this guy doing? And I'm pretty sure he was an electrician. He was stealing wheels from work, and he was in there splitting the copper to get the copper out to basically bring it to the scrapyard to get paid. But you can't bring the whole wheel because they'll get, where'd you get this freaking thing? And you get in trouble, so you have to like literally, you have to peel it off, right? There's only one copper piece that's inside. You have to basically peel it off to cut the copper on it. He used to do this every night, like an hour. He would just sit there and do it. and you'd see them again. So, huge money in refining these things. Okay. As I mentioned, it's extremely volatile. When there's strong growth, there's higher demand for the commodity. When there's weak growth, obviously demand for the commodity drops. As the demand starts to drop or increase, the price is going to basically change. And so, one of the major things in extractive industry, specifically oil, is the fact that the cost of exploration is so high that the volatility is actually a problem for a lot of companies to get into this. And so what happens is you'll actually find buyers of their oil and they'll hedge their prices for longer periods of time to create a bit of stability for themselves. So I'll give you an example. If I'm Suncor and I'm in the tar sands, and I'm extracting oil from the tar sands, I'm selling it to somebody for refining, and I have a buyer for my oil, I'm going to sign an agreement for 10 years where the cost of oil is going to be, they're going to buy it from me at $75 a barrel. Regardless of what happens to the price, if demand could shoot up and the price could go to $150 a barrel, they're still going to pay me $75 a barrel for the length of that contract. And so they hedge their prices because of that volatility. The fact that you have major boom and bust cycles, that's how you augment that. Yeah, part of augmenting that, these sort of upswings that take place is by hedging. So when the tar sand prices, when the cost of oil dropped and it was hard, like you have a lot of these companies like Baytex, Athabasca Oil, Whitecap, Suncor. Suncor a little bit less because they're a lot larger. Cost of oil dropped, Suncor wasn't going to end up this price. Like that would have to be at that level for like a really long time, but Athabasca Oil had some problems. Yeah. Canadian Oil Sands had some problems. These are companies that are much smaller and they're not hedged for longer periods of time, and their production is actually quite small. Yeah? So the production's small, and that makes it quite difficult for them to compete. And those are the companies that were in deepest trouble, and the ones that either got bought out by bigger companies or that eventually closed their doors because they can't compete in that marketplace anymore because the cost of extraction is so high. Again, they do this to protect themselves. If you're going to invest that kind of money in exploration and production, you need to have a guaranteed buyer for a certain amount of time at that level. Make sense?
So, but big companies also use that forward contracts?
Yeah, they all do. The ones that are most vulnerable are the smaller companies because their contracts tend to be not as good. Does that make sense? Yeah, if I'm a small company in the tar sands, all companies will do it for this. Like Suncor has agreements, long-term agreements with people. Smaller productions will have, their contracts are sometimes not as favorable.
They use for financial planning usually.
Natural gas, same thing. Yeah, they'll do so they know, right?
Are the contracts for a smaller company is not favorable for the company or for the buyer?
Not always, right? You can have a small company that has a favorable contract, but it just tends to be the ones that are more vulnerable. Yeah, because their production's smaller. It's economy of scale thing, right? I have to go to Suncor and I know that their production is, 1,000 barrels more. I'm just making up numbers, whatever it is, right? X amount of barrels more, then that's a more reliable source for me than I go to, Athabasca Oil, which is a smaller company, and their production is significantly less than one of those, right? So things like that. When you're smaller, it makes it a little bit more difficult. The companies that actually were hurt were the ones that their agreements were up. Yeah? So they didn't have, their prices weren't put in yet. And so all of a sudden the price drops and then they have to make a new agreement with somebody and they're like, well shit, it cost me $70 to just extract. And now it's worth $40. They're not going to pay me $75 for my oil. What am I going to do? Yeah? Make sense? Or same thing with mortgages. The rate for mortgages changes all the time. If I'm locked in on a mortgage for 5 years, I don't care what happens today. I just hope that in 5 years when I have to go renew my mortgage, that whatever the lending rate is, if I'm locked in, whatever that lending rate is favorable for me. Sometimes it's not. That is favorable to the bank. Right? And then they get locked in. That's something that was much higher. I know lots of people that locked in their mortgages pre-2008. Yeah? all of a sudden the interest rates drop to 2%, they're locked in at 5. Sucks, yeah? Or you go variable, but yeah, right, that's how you augment some of this. Take a break after this one, okay? Here we're looking at fluctuations in prices of oil and metallic minerals. Don't worry about metallic minerals for now. We're just going to really focus on the oils and this this gray line. There was a 7-sister cartel initially that controlled oil, and those 7 countries basically controlled oil. Oil was quite stable in price, okay? We'll get into who those countries are in a little bit, so don't worry. Then we come into our first oil crisis in 1973. There was basically an oil embargo which was put in place, which drove the cost of oil up, almost over double the price of oil. It was basically a response to the Yom Kippur War. It was basically Egypt and Syria were mad at the U.S. Because they basically supplied the Israelis with arms, and basically to punish them, they stopped sending them oil, and all of a sudden production changed and the cost has basically went through the roof. Okay. Then you have the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution in the 1980s, and again, you have this other jump in oil prices. Okay? Then they basically dropped back down, quite stable through the 80s and 90s, and then again, you started to increase. And so if you were to look at this in 2008, you will see that it sort of came back down to this point. Yeah? We were up at 100 plus a barrel. Yeah? And then we sort of came back down. I think the worst that it was at was, what, 40 for crude? I think it was like in the 40s. That was the worst it got to. What are we at now? It's in the 50s now, right? Something like that. Food and oil prices kind of go hand in hand because oils there's obviously a correlation between oil and other commodities because how they rely on those commodities as well. So here we're looking at food production and oil. And you can see that they are, they follow a similar sort of pattern through time. Okay, we'll take a break now. We'll take about 5-10 minutes and we'll start up again.
That's all.
Get started again.
Okay. How is technology important in this process? We'll think about, obviously, we'll use oil as an example. What's the importance of technology in this? Yeah.
That technology could also get better, like extraction and hydroplaning technology, so it might become cheaper and more efficient for you to do so.
Okay.
Transportation even.
Yeah. But think about it for each individual point. What you said is correct. So think about each individual point of that production circle. Yeah?
I think you get better technology for just figuring out what resource deposits are, and they'll save money there, and it'll be easier to find where it's worthwhile to extract.
So think about the technological challenges that might exist for exploration and development.
They can like build something and then run into a complication where they can't extract with the equipment that they have, and they have to like redo like all their machinery.
Sure. Let's think about it more specific, like more, I guess, in more than a general sense. Think about what drives the cost of oil? Demand. So tell me some challenges that might be in exploration and development, and ultimately extraction, these first three here. So what happens if there are technological changes in where to use the end users? Yeah? What happens to supply and demand? So definitely. How about what you can extract today? The amount or the cost of oil is dependent on current reserves. Yeah? Of what's known to exist that we can actually get to. We know there's a bunch of oil in the bottom of the ocean. Right? And that there's more oil than what we can actually get to. But is it worth anything if we can't get to it? No, of course not. Yeah? So this is part of that kind of, that argument. Yeah? Or so that, right, there's very huge location sort of specific element to these types of things where technology is extremely important in identifying whether or not you can extract from these places or not. Make sense? Now, if you think about this to the papaya, the major difference here in technology is that the technologies that are required for extractive industries are insanely expensive. Yeah? You're talking about billions of dollars. Billions, right, to develop these things and to extract. Okay, so some of those like technological challenges are embedded in the fact that there are some basic characteristics to these types of commodities that make it expensive, that pose some challenges from the extraction side. Yeah? Ultimately, what ends up happening, this happens all the way through. Okay, the one thing I want to sort of get your attention toward, thinking about, is the fact that this is a highly capital-intensive operation. It is not a labor-intensive operation. Yeah? They don't hire an abundance of people to do these jobs. There's very few people that are doing them. But it costs a lot of money to actually do it. So there's a lot of machinery, right? There's a lot of technology that's being deployed that replaces human labor, okay? Just to put into perspective, ExxonMobil employs about 80,000 employees, or has about 80,000 employees, whereas Walmart has about 2.1 million. Yeah? The sales for employees for ExxonMobil are about 4.83 million versus Walmart's $80,000. Yeah? Sales per employee. So you get the kind of the scale that kind of comes out there in terms of helping understand some of the complexity. Transportation. How do you transport the oil? Think about some of the complexities within that, some of the difficulties. When you think about maybe some of that distance that needs to be covered from buyers to sellers, and from the sellers where it's consumed to where it's sold, right? Or to who's selling to where it's being consumed, right? So there's an uneven geography there as well. There's obviously some implications that what are the safest ways to transport these things, right? So we're talking about maybe there's movement of natural gas, oil, whatever it might be, right? So looking at the use of pipelines, yeah? Or some of the issues with pipelines. What are some of the issues with pipelines? Yeah, so in what sense? In what sense is there an environmental issue? Huh? Leaks? There might be a potential for a leak. Yeah,
There's been like disruption of ecosystems just putting in there.
you're like bulldozing through entire natural, neighbor, like just entire area where you're literally laying sort of a path for these things, and that's somewhat problematic. Yeah, so there's an environmental issue from that perspective. What else? Yeah,
Aboriginal land rights issues.
yeah, whose land is it? What else? I think you're forgetting a really important one. We're dealing with a finite resource. These are not renewable. So what happens? 100 years from now, 30, 40, 50 years, when you're no longer extracting, you're transporting that from one place to another, what do you do with that system? Yeah, that's now disrupted natural environment that might have displaced or has gone through some sacred land, or First Nations kind of you got to deal with some of these issues. What happens to that land? What happens to those pipelines? What happens to those communities that are built off those types of things? So it gets you thinking from that consumption side too, like the heavy technology on all sides. There are three major technological challenges to the extractive industry. We start off with I guess one of the most simple ones, which is actually finding new supply. So new sources of supply must continuously be sought. Yeah, so you have to constantly be finding these things. You need to constantly invest money in searching for new resources, new supply to be there. Because existing sources might obviously get exhausted in the sense that there might not be anything left there, or it might become too expensive to extract from those sources anymore. And I'll explain we'll look at some of these examples where secondary extraction might be too costly, and you might have to look for other opportunities. Second, extracting the highest yield from the source, and so that's a technological problem. You know it's there, but I can't get to it. You know that there's a huge resource or an abundance of available amount of that resource in that location, you can't get to it, and that's a problem. And the third is obviously source to market. How are we going to get it there, right? So how are we going to be able to actually ship it to these places? And also there's a market price issue. So even if I get it there, what are they going to pay for it? Yeah? And me getting it there, and that's somewhat of a problem. What did it cost me to do? And what does it cost to actually extract? I was in a coffee shop this week, and there was a couple that was in the house talking about their property. And they must have a wonderful, beautiful home somewhere. They were talking about how they bought an old house. I wasn't even talking, they were talking extremely loud in the right now. So don't judge me, okay? And so they're talking about they bought this house, they tore it down, and they built like this massive home here. And they were talking about a conversation how they got brother-in-law or something, I don't know. They had a conversation with somebody and they said, hey man, why don't you sell your house? Because the area was worth X amount of dollars. And even if they sold their house, they would still be in the hole like about $1 million or something like that. Because the amount of money that they invested, they paid for the property that they bought, and the amount of money that they invested into their actual home. It just shows, I mean, you assume because the property values are high that everybody's on the winning side currently, but that's not necessarily the case, right? If you, same thing with sort of oil, you're extracting oil, yeah, it's a commodity that's sought after, but how much you invest into the extraction dictates how much money you make. Does that make sense? Just because it exists here doesn't mean it's worth anything. Yeah, it might be worth something, but you might have to wait. So we see this even with grain. We see it with grain in the prairies, right? We have grain elevators where they store grain, wait for the prime time to put it into the market when the price is right. Yeah? We sell our grain to people. We have grain elevators. Literally, they're like elevator shafts in the middle of the prairies where you store grain and you wait. Yeah? Oh, it's not up a line. All right, sell. Yeah? There's a lot of sort of, I guess, common things that sort of take place in a lot of different industries. Within the extractive, there are a series of things that they, although there are market issues with all kinds of things, when it comes from an extractive industry perspective, there are common elements that a lot of these industries experience. And so one of them is obviously the fact that it's things over time, and that's a lot of pressure, yeah? And that does things to the price, it drives price. Second thing is the role of technology and innovation, and so we're constantly trying to innovate, and so some of us believe that we're all doomed, we rely on oil, eventually we're all doomed. Yeah, we're not gonna have enough of it, and we're so reliant on it, and we're all gonna, there's gonna be crazy wars, and, eventually we'll all, die. And we don't have oil, and I mean, these are real people thinking of these things, they don't know when it's gonna happen, but that's ultimately what's gonna end up taking place, yeah? So we're not gonna be able to heat our homes, cool our homes, we're not gonna be able to eat, so we're not gonna be able to do anything because of how reliant we are on oil. I am more of an optimistic kind of person, and I think that technology, I don't think it's gonna save us necessarily, but I think eventually we'll find new sources, and we'll move away from our reliance on these things. And innovation is a huge help, and so, again, you start to look at, what role is innovation going to play in terms of leading us out of our reliance on some of these commodities that are heavily, that are volatile, one, and two, that are obviously going to deplete over time. And so what else is going to be available to us? And so I'm of the belief that we'll find new sources of energy. I'm of the belief that these things will change, and our reliance on these things will ultimately change over time. The Jevons paradox, anyone know what this is? The Jevons paradox, ever heard this before? Anybody heard this before? The Jevons paradox is basically, I'll give you a quick example of how this sort of works. You ever been on a highway and there's been construction, and then they finish the construction, and then the traffic flows for like a day, and then all of a sudden it's like congested all over again. So like, let's say you're on a highway, you added a new lane, and all of a sudden it's about a week or something. Oh man, the 401's amazing, no traffic, and then that lasts literally about 5 days, and then following Monday, you get on that highway, and it's like gridlock again. Yeah. So what happens is we stop using certain roads, yeah, because of congestion. We'll look for alternative routes. Yeah. As people become aware of those alternative routes, what happens on those alternative routes? You get congested. I got into an argument with somebody not that long ago. I was in the car. I'm like, dude, there's no magic road. It's gonna make you bypass all this traffic in the city of Toronto. It doesn't exist. Yeah. It's kind of like, road that nobody drives on. So that's part of the Jevons paradox. So the argument when it comes to things like oil is we make fuel-efficient cars, right? Yeah, we make fuel-efficient cars. Unfortunately, oil has a direct result of the consumption side in terms of how much money you save. So I remember when you own a hybrid car, that's cheaper on gas. A car that's cheaper on gas, that's known to be cheaper on gas. Anybody here drive a car that's known to be cheaper on gas? No one here drives a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic? Yeah? Yeah. Like everybody drives a Honda Civic or Toyota Corolla, the most widely purchased car, but in this class there's nobody. Well, just saying, okay, maybe your family members, whoever it might be, anyway. Like every second car I see on the road is either a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic. A big reason why those are big selling cars is one, you have this perception of durability, they're gonna last a long time. Two, cheap to fix. Okay? Three, perception of what the real resale value that is maintained. And fourth, they're generally fuel efficient. As we develop new models that are more fuel efficient, ultimately who ends up saving money? Who saves money? Who saves money? If you buy a fuel efficient car, who's ultimately going to save money?
The consumer.
The consumer, the person that drives that vehicle, you don't spend as much money in funds, right? So the reason why I don't go around driving that Ford F-150 is because I like them, but I don't have $250 a week to put in that gas tank. It's that simple. Yeah? Make sense? Okay. Environmental issue, obviously, I don't need that Ford F-150, but you get the point, right? And so ultimately what ends up happening is that cost saving gets pushed down. What do people start doing? It becomes more affordable for you to own a car, what are you going to do? You're going to buy a car. Yeah? Ultimately, what can end up happening is you increase the amount of demand on that resource. Does that make sense? So you do something to try to minimize it, so that ultimately what ends up happening is that you ultimately start to increase it. So it kind of reverses the, right? You kind of do the reverse. Does that make sense? Yeah? Who here does not drive? I bet you that if I was to survey any non-driver in this class, and I was to ask you why you don't drive, there's three things that you would tell me the reasons why you don't drive. One, be the cost of the vehicle. Two, be the cost of insurance. And three, be the cost of fuel. Would that be a safe bet? Okay?
Transit is like perfect where I live.
So the alternative options, you're aware of these, because most people would not say the alternative options. Yeah, I think it's fully legal. Yeah, it should be the case, alternative options should provide a disincentive. That's why we develop. If people get upset, like, oh, the gardener's a disaster, well, who cares? And if you put proper transit, and I can get downtown, I'll take in the gardener, who cares with the gardener? Does that make sense? You give me transit options, I won't drive. Does that make sense? Yeah. If I want to take public transit to U of T, you know how long it would take me? I teach me to go 16 minutes to get here from my house. 16 minutes. I live in Toronto. There's 16 minutes, no traffic on this direction. I hate driving. I don't like driving ever. I don't like driving anywhere, ever. Yeah. I would much rather take transit everywhere. I'm just that guy. Yeah. And with regards to anyone, but I don't like driving. If I can get there with transit, I'll do it. It would take me an hour and 40 minutes to get here. I have two options. I can take Mississauga buses by going to Islington Station, or I can go to St. George, which takes me an hour, and then get on a shuttle bus, and then create additional traffic. Yeah? That's the consequence, and it's the reason why I drive here. Yeah, I'd rather not. Yeah, anyway. So that is some of these arguments they get with transit users and vehicles. I had to argue with my dad. My dad was so bitter when they put, on St. Clair, they put the streetcar lanes. He was all upset about it, right? He was like, oh, this is terrible, this is whatever, and I was like, well, it's not. I mean, yes, in the short term it's terrible, but if you provide better, hey guys, if you provide better alternatives, then all of a sudden, you're not removing those options, you're not removing accessibility, you're adding accessibility, you're just displacing the mode of transportation that you choose to take. And that should be the goal. Yeah, does that make sense? From an environmental standpoint, from all kinds of different things. Like it becomes efficient and you're more likely to do it. Yeah, and less likely to partake in other things. Like in New York City, have you ever been to Manhattan? Yeah? Nobody drives. Like it's dead, like I'm dead, and nobody drives in Manhattan. If you look on the street, it's taxi cabs. Legitimately. 99% of the vehicles are cabs. Maybe Ubers, I don't know now. Yeah? You got some Ubers and you got the gypsy cabs, right? Whatever they call them. The ones that are not licensed. They're licensed but not, you don't know. Yeah? That's what they call it there, I know, it's just slang or whatever. Yeah? That's what the road are probably made up of. You know why? And the cabs are so cheap. Aaron, you take a cab in New York City? It's dirt cheap. I was like, you think it's not $40? I feel like I get in a cab in the city of Toronto, I pay $40. I can go in a block and pay $40. Yeah? So cheap. You know why they're so cheap? There's an alternative option. And so if they're not cheap, you're just not going to use them. Yeah? Taking the subway, you can get anywhere on their subway system. Right? Those alternatives will eventually just stop people from taking or relying on other modes of transportation. It's pretty cool. When you kind of look at it in practice, it becomes quite fascinating. Anyway, that's what the Jevons paradox is, and it's it's something to consider. Yeah, keep making fuel-efficient cars. I think somebody was. I'm going to share this with you. I shared it with you the last I think, and I also had a student that talked about this last year. But there's a big, there's a larger environmental or carbon footprint to produce a Tesla, one Tesla, than it does to produce a gas vehicle, and that has to do literally with the volume, the number of cars that they're producing. Obviously, from an electric perspective, if you produce way more electric vehicles, then obviously it sort of mainstreams that process. And the footprint to produce one Tesla does not double with every additional car. Does that make sense? The plant has a certain footprint. Does that make sense? The more cars you put on, the less that each car from the total that actually accounts for. The plant production takes up a large amount. Does that make sense? So actually, you might think that you're doing environmentally friendly, but buying a Tesla actually has a larger geographical, or a larger like, sort of environmental issue, yeah? Or poses a larger geographic or environmental issue. Here we're looking at oil. So we're looking at secondary extraction of oil. So what's secondary? This is primary extraction. You basically, this is obviously offshore, offshore oil. You come in and you basically, there's oil in the pores of these rocks, and you basically suck it out. Okay, that's generally what happens. In secondary extraction, what happens is there's a bunch of oil that you can't get to. And what basically happens now is that you send in basically pressure or water, in this case it's water pressure, which basically displaces the rocks and releases that oil that you can extract. The biggest difference between this and this is that this is usually technologically feasible and efficient, whereas this is not. It tends to be quite expensive. And so for you to be able to do this, the cost of oil has to be high. If it's not high, you can't do it, okay? And so that's, imagine you have scenario A, and you can go in, you can extract, it's feasible, market price, if the price of oil is stable and maybe low, it's not feasible to go in and participate in secondary extraction, so what you basically do is you close the actual facility. Yeah? Think about scenario B, say that all of a sudden it's 1973, and the cost of oil rises because of the embargo. All of a sudden it becomes economically viable to extract, to do secondary extraction, and so you reopen that facility to actually do it. So it's not like you just take the facility and walk away. Obviously, your market price for these types of commodities will dictate what types of activities will actually take place. Everybody know about hydraulic fracking? Yeah? What does it do? What's hydraulic fracking? What's fracking? Hydraulic fracking. Sorry. What is it? Yeah.
I don't know if it's the same, but in chemistry, when you do fracking, you just take the oil and you kind of transform it to make it into something that's more useful. I don't know if it's the same process.
Nope.
Since steam and the ground to crack the rocks, release the oil.
Sorry?
Since steam and salt and the ground to crack the
Yeah.
rocks.
So hydro's water intensive. To look at the depth, you can just get a scale of depth. So how deep they actually go to actually do this. Could be shale, could be a variety of different types of things that they can extract. It could be also natural gas. But basically what happens is you displace things underneath the ground, and then you basically extract that commodity before doing that. This is extremely expensive. It's not cheap. So there's a lot of economic constraints to actually doing this. And there's a lot of environmental issues. So one, obviously, there's a water problem that can arise from this. And the second thing is earthquakes. Yeah? There's actually been links between increased numbers of earthquakes with fracking. I'll give you an example. There's a paper done in BC. The paper that first came out and said this, and now it's like starting to be proved that there's some relationship between fracking and earthquakes. So for a similar area, a similar time span, similar area in British Columbia, pre-fracking and post-fracking, what they found was a number of earthquakes in that time span jumped from 20, whatever it is, the smallest time span, from 20 to about 200. Yeah? Like, that's a huge problem. Yeah? So we know it's there. The current way that we extract it has a variety of environmental issues, social. Anybody here really want to live in California? Yeah, I'd love to live in California. I remember living in California. Yeah. One thing I thought about when I was on my way to California, maybe I'm a bit paranoid. You know what I was worried about? Earthquakes. Like, not kind of worried. Like, I was seriously worried. Yeah? I was, because I'm a social scientist. Yeah? And so I did research before I went somewhere in terms of the volume of earthquakes that they get, and it is ridiculous. Right? The amount of earthquakes that they get a year is ridiculous. Now, most are very minor, yeah? Like extremely minor to the point that it's like, whatever, for a local, they're probably just like, yeah, and you keep going. But for me, as a tourist going there, you start to worry about these types of things, yeah? Like the severity, what could happen, preparation, there's a variety of things. Even in BC, they deal with like tsunami, like they have tsunami rescue plans, right, for people on Vancouver Island. But if there's a risk, what do they do? Where do they go? Things of that nature. So anyway, I would love to in California, the one thing that will never, I don't even care what the hell they offer me, that will keep me from living in California is literally the fear. I have a fear of earthquakes. Yeah? It sounds funny, but it's intense, man. Think about how you, like, it's funny because it makes you start thinking about your decision-making process in terms of where you live and how you live there. We live in one of the safest places. I'm not even kidding you, man. One of the safest places from natural disasters in like the world. Yeah? It's like we have no water shortage issues or any major ones because this is the area with the largest abundance of fresh water. We're not living on any fault lines where we need to fear major earthquakes. Could we get earthquakes here? Sure. In my entire life, we've had 3. They all happen in very short in short time spans. One time I was at work, I thought somebody was shaking my chair in 2008. I think you remember this one. It happened in Ottawa, or somewhere near, I guess, the Ottawa, Gatineau area. I was sitting in my chair, I thought a guy at work was shaking my desk chair. And I turned around and was like, hey, dude, what the hell are you doing? And I turned around and like nobody was there. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And then another time I was in my building where I work, I was just supposed to go to class, and all of a sudden I felt like that teeter. I thought it was going, I vertigo or something. You know, I felt like a bad inner ear. I'm like, there must be an inner ear issue. And I just kind of ignored it until I was walking. And then as I'm walking, I hear people talking about earthquakes, and I go, oh, I know it's an earthquake. I think it was because I heard horror stories when I was a kid from my grandmother in Italy. There are earthquakes all the time. It wipes out entire. It wipes out places. Yeah, like not like, oh, there's an earthquake in that part of the town that's kind of demolished. No, entire places will be demolished. Yeah, because they're so old. Like some of these towns are so crazily old. They're built on the side of cliffs that literally, like, earthquakes come and like the whole, like, you know, the 5,000 people that live there. See ya. Yeah. All of them. It's crazy. Like you got to see something like it's absolutely nuts. And there's always like these like stories about like there's like some statue of Mother Mary that survived the earthquake and it's in a church now somewhere. Well, like I'm not even kidding. Like in a mountain, those types of things. Think about how developments happen. When I was in California, we drove through. I went there for a conference. I actually made my way. I still did. It's terrifying every day, but I get there and we went to Malibu. And some of these houses are like $1 million homes on the side of like cliffs. They actually, I was talking to an appraisal, a guy who works for an insurance company, says that they can't insure those properties. So the people that actually live in those homes, they're not, no company will insure them. And so literally, I mean, I think they were insured for like fire or something, if that somebody breaks in. But it's such a risky property because of those issues that they will not insure them. So they basically, if something happens to the house, they have to pay cash to replace it. So you gotta be like stupid rich to like to be in those circumstances and situations. Pretty. Yeah, so increased earthquakes, water contamination, a variety of different things that will pose some problems. Obviously, we have ongoing explorations for new sources. These are lengthy and expensive processes, so this is why you don't have a lot of companies that come in. It is really sort of structured with very few companies that sort of control these industries. Developing new industries, again, new sources, again, very, very expensive. Deep ocean drilling, hydraulic fracking, they're not commonly used because, one, there's obviously a lot of pushback from the social side. Cost is a major problem. And again, cost, and there's a connection between, obviously, market conditions, exploration, and development, right? So cost of the commodities can determine whether or not you can extract that at that time. Yeah.
The previous slide you had developing new sources. I'm just curious, isn't it a really long process to create oil? How do these companies go about developing new sources of oil?
They don't develop, it's developing the source sites. Yeah, or finding new ways to find, to extract sources of oil that existed before. So for example, we know that there's a bunch of oil in the ocean, like we know it's there, yeah? But we don't have the technology necessarily to do deep ocean drilling to make it economically viable to extract. Does that make sense? Yeah, we know it's there, yeah? But it's not considered part of our reserve because we can't get to it.
Who owns the oil in the ocean?
Yes, it depends where. There are obviously borders that deal with at what point, how many nautical miles off the shoreline is owned by whom, and what is international waters, and how you can lay claim on those things. There's obviously, it varies by place, but oftentimes within the immediate vicinity, within a certain amount of distance, countries will actually control
their water. It's part of the issue with the cod stuff, right? We're coming to Canadian waters, and we're fishing cod, yeah, from Europe, right? Portuguese, the Scandinavian countries. Yeah. Make sense? But that, I mean, that becomes a world issue. That's what's going on there. Who owns that? Who's going to pay for that stuff?
So the problems, again, in the nature of the product is you oftentimes in like really remote places. So that obviously poses some issues with distribution. Think about the Athabasca region in Canada. Who heard about the Athabasca region in Canada? I was pumped about it before the car sales. I don't think so. These places tend to be quite isolated. They tend to be in areas that would not be prone to other types of industries. And so they literally develop for those issues, for those reasons, right, to extract. So what happens in a place like huge social issues? I read an article actually that was talking about prostitution and drug abuse in Athabasca. Anyone ever read this thing? Might have been multiple, but anyone ever looked at this? So there's basically this huge, like, alcohol, drug abuse became a large problem for a lot of people that worked up there just because there was lack of, I guess, like, I don't know, it gave a variety of reasons. That and because the industry tends to be dominated by males, there was a huge influx of basically, there's a sort of a prostitution ring that kind of developed in those areas for those guys. They make a lot of money, yeah, and there's really no place to kind of spend it, not much to do, and they work relatively hard, and so, you know, this ends up, there were studies that were looking at some of these problems, yeah, that existed, because there are problems that exist. So you start thinking about things like that, right? Think of transportation of the products. What happens when you have to close, it's no longer viable? What do you do with those transportation corridors? Yeah? How about the infrastructure that you have to set up? Yeah? Retail growth in the Athabasca region and like with like 1,000, it grew like 1,000%, right? Because there's a huge population that exists there now. So now you have to provide them retail. There's a huge retail opportunity. You got to feed them and clothe them. And there's obviously an opportunity of building houses. Yeah, there becomes this entire industry or this entire sort of city that gets developed because of that. And that's fine. It's wonderful until there's no work anymore. Yeah, there's no other industries that sort of focus besides from the retail side beyond what is literally connected to that oil industry. And so if that is gone, what happens to those people? They leave. Yeah, they go back home. Yeah, a lot of those people that work there aren't Athabascan natives. You know what I mean? People that grew up in that region. They're from Edmonton, they're from Calgary, they're from other parts of Canada, from Newfoundland, from Ontario. Yeah, so they leave these places and then they become a very depressed sort of town. I don't know if you've ever been to. I've been to Prince George in BC, which is kind of like there's still a bit of industry there, but nothing remotely close to what it used to be. One of the things I was there with my wife, and one of the things my wife said was actually really funny, was that we went to a mall. I had to do some data collection, so I was over at this mall, and we stopped to get something to eat. And as we're eating, I remember saying to her, she said to me, George said, there's no women. And I was like, I was kind of like, I looked around, I was like, oh my God. Like, it was disproportionately male, like significantly to the point that it was so evident that when you walked in, that you could see it. And that had to do with, when we actually stayed in a hotel, that the hotel actually puts people up for work. So they go there, they work, and then they stay in this hotel. The company pays for them to stay in this hotel. And they leave. It was the worst hotel I've ever been in my life. It was gross. Like, just went down, beat up the only hotel in town, basically. And again, very, very structured on working there in the industry, largely forestry, right? Yeah. State involvement, territorial amendments, obviously the states can regulate this and they can obviously operate these things. So again, there could be, again, conflicts that can arise off these types of things in terms of ownership, who owns it. Oftentimes we get these power struggles. In a lot of places what tends to happen, it's actually quite sad, is that there's, and sometimes agreements will be signed between states in terms of who gets right to exploration, who has right over the resources. What happens in a lot of places, especially in Africa, is that you'll have countries that will go in, like China, and they'll say, and I don't want to debate this because you get pretty sensitive over this kind of stuff, but they'll go in and they'll say, okay, you don't have the know-how, you don't have the ability to extract that resource, we'll extract it for you. And the country says, okay. And we'll sign an agreement with you for that extraction. And we'll say, okay, we'll sign this agreement and say, okay, in exchange for extracting and getting that natural resource out, we'll build up your infrastructure. So invest money in the infrastructure, build roads, probably have to be built anyway because how are you gonna get to those resources? Okay? And then basically they start to extract the stuff, and they take ownership over that commodity. And oftentimes these are very one-sided where the actual resource is housed, they're becoming the losers. Yeah, they lose. The agreements do not favor them, they favor obviously other parties, the people that are going in there. And so that they'll actually demand for consideration that, like, hey man, once they start to learn about the process, they'll ask for negotiations, right, in terms of some of those commodities. But again, these are bound by geographies. Yeah? So who's going to develop that? Are they going to be external companies that come in to deal with that? Is it going to be other countries, states, maybe state-controlled businesses that come in and do that? Or are you going to develop that stuff internally? Again, so this is what this is talking about, it's research rich of 4 countries. Again, a lack of experience by countries, so they rely on outside expertise or TNCs or other major countries to come in and actually extract the stuff. And so you start to see some of those problems. We're starting to see a shift between private firms that are starting to control some of these commodities to state-driven, largely because of their importance. Okay. A lot of what's done is they've begun to control prices. Part of what happened a couple years ago was the fact that when the price dropped of oil, was the fact that the OPEC countries, based on Saudi Arabia specifically, flooded the market. And so they're always in sort of trying to control these prices so that there's a bit of stability within that industry. Here we're looking at the world's largest oil companies. Yeah, Saudi Arabia, it shows what percent are state-owned, right? So are they transnational corporations, or are they state-controlled operations, and what percent of them are state-controlled? Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, yeah. You sort of see about half of them, right? Have 4 of the top 5, and 15 girls, 25 are fully or majority state-owned. Yeah. The top 10 companies here actually account for about 60% of the world oil production. Okay. So you get an idea of, because it's so capital intensive, you don't have a lot of small players. You have few large companies that control that operation. We're looking at the world's metal mining companies. Okay, very different. Top 10 metal mining companies account for about 1/5 of the world production output, but they're less of a controlled state from the state perspective. Okay, we're going to look at a video. It's not working. I thought it worked. That the link's dead, but it basically was looking at it was like oil in the Amazon, and the companies went in and they extracted and they made a mess. I think it was BP. And so it was like some legal kind of battle that was going on. The video was just wanted to show that. It's quite interesting. If I can find it again, if I find another live link for it, I'll try to show it to you guys. We're really at the geographies of oil production by some major companies. The companies, you get an idea of what they account for, what they can say. Okay. Some of the organizational structure, again, major companies, they're going to vary, obviously, in terms of what they look like, in terms of what products they do. Oftentimes, a lot of these companies won't specify or won't specialize in one individual product. They might have multiple, or especially when it comes to like metal mining, they might be, extracting one thing today, they find another mine with something else, and they'll extract that tomorrow, and so on and so forth. Right? So you'll find companies quite frequently that they'll extract zinc, and then they'll do silver and gold and whatever, right? So they'll be part of that. They'll have multiple mines that do multiple things. Yeah. Oftentimes, when it comes to oil, it's a little bit different. You'll only have a oil company. Yeah. Again, we have a lot of vertically integrated companies, so they'll control all aspects. You'll have a company that will control from the exploration, the development, to the production, ultimately to the refining, and they'll control all of that, even to the consumption side. So let's say, you could have a gas company, or you could have a company which owns a gas station, right from the exploration all the way to the gas station, like you go, for example. Okay? So again, highly vertically integrated because there's obviously some benefits there. Some polarized views, especially for now for controlling resources. Malthusian theory basically said that we're all going to starve, right? I'm going to talk to you about this. Malthusian was a very religious dude who thought that we were going to have lots of babies and we were not going to increase our production of food production. So ultimately what's going to happen is we were going to starve. And then that would create crazy famines, and then we'd all fight. And there'd be all these crazy wars that would basically take place over food. He was very religious, and so he didn't believe in people not having protected sex. At that time, it was very common for people to have large families. By the time a child was 4 years old, they were already an economic benefit. And so people had babies all the time, they needed them for our labor force, where they actually had economic value. Today, it's quite the opposite. If you have a child, it's more of an economic burden than any benefit. And that burden is not only till 4 years old, it's till they're 24 years old, right? You get my point, right? So it's not the same kind of idea. And so that's what he said. What technocentric people basically do is say, technology's going to fix it all. Yeah, so any problems that might exist with resources like food or oil will be fixed by the techno side. We'll innovate and we'll find new ways to extract, we'll adapt, and we'll fix those problems. That's what happened with food, right? We didn't predict that it'd be this whole green revolution and the production or the yield that we would actually produce of the same parcels of land would basically exponentially increase. Yeah? And he didn't realize that we would have less babies. Right? So population would stagnate, right? Or hover around zero in terms of growth rates in markets like Canada and the United States, in the developing world. Yes, in the developing world, population increases are still profound, like they still happen, but in the developed world, not as much. Some major themes we'll talk about is environmental sustainability concerns. Some of these things. Called peak oil. Well, peak oil basically is, I'm not going to get too much into this. It's basically identifying at what point did we hit that peak and are we on the decline because of the amount of resources actually available there. And so a lot of what that has to do with is basically discussing at what point will problems start to arise as a result of this. And there's been a bunch of speculations in terms of what peak oil is and what the time frame is for it. But we'll eventually get into it. We'll talk about other resources. Next week, I think we're going to talk about agriculture. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Sounds good? See you guys
但是第二个小时他又在讲故事了。